My title for this talk is Outside the Box, and then the Janus Project. And I've actually divided it into two parts. So there's actually two presentations. Outside the Box is going to deal with the problem that any artist who goes to art school encounters if they don't fit into the box. The box also refers to the museum space and the gallery space, and lastly, the studio space. And I'm part of a movement of artists, contemporary artists, who are experimenting with new venues, new ways to put the art in the public place and challenging the notion of where art belongs. The notion, this is the oldest museum in the Americas. It is the first museum in this republic. The idea of republic is new, but the idea of museums is even newer. There weren't museums 250 years ago. This was a revolutionary idea that came with our revolution and was emulated later in Europe and in other places. I'm going to refer to a couple of artists in the beginning here, and so I'm going to move into my first image. This image that I'm showing you is, these are the plates for a print that has actually put me on this podium today. I'm doing a collaborative project in consort with the Brandywine Archive and Workshop, which is just a few blocks away on South Broad Street, and 6 artists. We are working on making a public art piece, which is a work of printmaking. Pretty unusual to do such a thing, to make public art with printmaking, and there are 6 artists collaborating on this. And anyone who understands contemporary art realizes that collaboration is a very big part of what's going on in the art world today, and it's not that easy. Even with all the social networking in the world, getting along with other artists and conforming your ideas is not always the easiest thing. So anyway, that was funded by the National Endowment, and that's my second involvement with the National Endowment monies, and hopefully we've spent them well and used them well. So anyway, moving along, I'm going to, this image that I'm going to show you here, I came from a small town in New Jersey, and there's actually a couple of people here tonight from that town. When I was a boy, this is a paint-by-number painting. This was as close as anybody in my town ever got to seeing a real painting. And, you know, this was all the rage in the 1950s. You went to the store and you got one of these kits, and your mother patiently followed the instructions and filled in the paint spaces, and then there was a ceremonial hanging of it on the living room wall, and then we all stared at it for years. And that formed our notion of what a painting was. But looking back on the project, I realized it was collaborative. Somebody created the design, and somebody else had to fill it in, and then it got stuck on your wall. And it was an oil painting, and it's not all that good, but it was my initial introduction. This is the Prometheus. Prometheus is in the Philadelphia Museum, was my other major influence. When I saw this painting for the first time, I was about 5 years old, and I was totally mesmerized. And I didn't care if the museum had anything else in it. Every time I went, this is all I wanted to see. This formed for me the idea of the perfect painting. It had a little, some flesh, it had animals, it had action, it had this big story, it had a moral, it had a point, and it was collaborative. It was painted by Peter Paul Rubens and Franz Snyders. And he collaborated with many artists through his long career. And Rubens was unique among the masters in that he traveled. He had a career in Madrid, he had a career in Paris, he had a career in London, he had a career in Antwerp, he had a career in Italy. Everywhere Rubens went, art came out of it. And he was using his art as a propaganda tool because he was the ambassador for the court of the Flemish Queen. He was the ambassador, equivalent to our Secretary of State, and he's the only artist in history ever to have negotiated a peace treaty. He negotiated the treaty to the resolution of the 30 Years' War with the King of England, the King of Spain, and the King of Amsterdam. So he put this thing together. He was a force in his era, and he was really one of the first teaching artists. He's responsible for Anthony van Dyck, Jacob Jordan's, Franz Snyders, and Bruegel the Younger. So it's a pretty good alumni association. This is another one of my early heroes, Hieronymus Bosch, who taught me about the magic of changing images. This is a triptych, an altar box, and it closes. And so the image changes from the inside to the outside. And it was the first time I ever saw anything like this, and it really made a big impact on me. And I was blessed this summer. I got to see the largest show of Hieronymus Bosch's work in Madrid 3 times when I was there. He's still pretty good. Now there's my first real American artist. This is George Catlin. George Catlin is from Pennsylvania. George Catlin was from Wilkes-Barre, and as a young man, he came to Philadelphia and studied with Charles Willson Peale. He then went west and forged into Indian territory where no white man had been, lived among the Indians, and painted their portraits. He painted for years in the West and then came east and tried to have shows of his work, donate the work. He tried to sell his work to the government. They weren't interested. So he went to Europe. And when I got to, I was in London a few years ago, and I saw an installation of his work at the National Portrait Gallery, and I was just knocked out because this is how he installed them. He put the paintings on the wall with numbers. And you got a little booklet that corresponded to the numbers that told you what you were looking at. And then he would go on the stage, a stage very much like this, and he would tell a story about going into the West to be with the Indians. And as he would tell the story, on either side, 2 people would turn a painting canvas on rollers so you looked like you were traveling down the river, the Mississippi, into the Great West. So he created a performance piece to make his work valuable. And he traveled around Europe and would do these performances and make a little money. In the end, his collection formed the basis of the Smithsonian collection in 1872. And he's the first artist to have been given in residence at the Smithsonian. Unfortunately, he died the same year, so he didn't last very long. All right? My next artist is another ironic Pennsylvanian. This is John James Audubon, born in Haiti, raised in France, but he came to live in Perkiomenville at the ripe old age of 18. And he had a farm in Perkiomenville, which is now in the town of Audubon, Pennsylvania. He also came to Philadelphia, met with Charles Willson Peale, but studied with another famous painter by the name of Thomas Sully. After he studied painting, he went into the West and into the South and a lot in Florida and became the artist who was chronicling birds. So he made these amazing drawings painted on paper, pictures of birds. He came back to Philadelphia with his pictures, and no one was interested. He tried to show them, he tried to print them, nobody was interested. So he went to Paris. Baudelaire saw this work and called Audubon the greatest artist working on paper alive, that no one in Paris could draw as well, and they had never seen drawings like his. So he raised money by selling subscriptions and printed this amazing book in this gigantic size at a cost of $115,000 in the 1840s. The cost of that today would be $2 million. And each one of these pages is an enormous work of art. Unfortunately, his wife melted down most of the plates to raise money. The problem artists always have is you're always short of cash. So anyway, we only have 80 of the original 437. And now my next comedian here this is Paul Gauguin. And Gauguin is a kind of a character. The history of art has rarely seen such a character. Besides his friendship with this guy, Van Gogh, this is a portrait of Van Gogh by Paul Gauguin. Gauguin has a very interesting life. He was born in Paris, but he was hushed off to Peru at the ripe old age of 6 months. And he didn't learn to speak French until he was 16 years old. He spoke Spanish first, and he learned about the world through the eyes of Peruvians because his father, the Frenchman, died within 6 months of his arrival in Peru. So one of the things he was fascinated with was pre-Columbian art. And he couldn't understand when he got to Europe why no one in Europe was interested in it because they hadn't even looked at it. And he went about trying to create Gauguin's version of pre-Columbian art. His various journeys, ultimately the Polynesian ones are the most famous, but he made several efforts to return to nature and live in the world of the unpolluted, the people without modernity. And in fact, the reason he died was he was to go to prison the next day. He committed suicide because he was campaigning for women's rights in the Polynesian islands, and the French saw him as guilty of sedition. So this great artist was sentenced to go to jail, and if you know anything about Gauguin, imagining him in jail was not going to be a good idea, so he chose to take his own life the night before he was to go to jail. Anyway, his influence on art, Sir Kenneth Clark said, had Gauguin not exposed Europe to pre-Columbian art, there would be no Henry Moore. There would be no Duchamp. He opened their eyes to what we called, when I was a student, ethnological art, but it's just art by another culture. And he he was able to support himself because when he got to Paris, he was smart enough to buy every Impressionist painting he could find, and he sold them through his whole career while he lived in Polynesia, and he supported himself and his family off the money he had made by wisely buying good art. This is a painting I made of a kid from my town when I was about 19 years old. And this is quite a bit different than that horse painting, but it's an oil on panel, and it talks about my early interest. Always I was interested in portraits, always interested in personality, and always interested in trying to make art. This is a painting I made after going to art school. Shows I actually think I learned something, I fit into the time, and this is about 6 feet across, painted from life. And now this is the first painting I ever exhibited in Philadelphia. I lived in New York City after graduate school for a few years, and these two delightful people came to see me in New York. They came from Philadelphia, and I really didn't know anything about Philadelphia galleries, but they were in Chestnut Hill. And so their name was Hahn, Roz and Mari Hahn, and so they came up to my studio in New York, and they offered me a show. So I this painting is 9 feet by 12 feet, and I rolled it up, and I walked down 42nd Street to the bus station and put it underneath the bus and drove to Philadelphia, carried it out to Chestnut Hill, and tacked it on their wall. This is, for me, a kind of the beginning of a thesis of ideas. If you look in this area here, this is not a great slide, I'm sorry, but you see how all those figures are dark here? When I came from the little town I came from, we had only white people, and there was no Jewish synagogue, there was no Catholic churches. There was a pretty clear WASP crowd. And when I went to college, I discovered that there were all these different people. And I got a little bit like, that was interesting. Plus, I discovered there was code that was spoken in my little town that everybody understood, that was just sort of referred to all the other people. My fascination since that time has always been the other. And I got it from realizing that it was much more interesting than where I came from. Believe me, I had a nice life, but it was boring. And if I had stayed in that, I don't know what would have happened. So anyway, what I did, I made this painting while living on 42nd Street in New York City. And so this is my homage to the bicentennial. And so it's a big star-shaped swimming pool. All the African Americans are organized in this area over here, and there's a block line over here to keep them from getting into the center of the star, right? Then the Hispanics are over here, and then everybody else is out here in the sunlight, and they're enjoying life and having games and fun. So about 370 figures in this painting. I worked on it for months, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing, and it was different than anything I'd ever done in school, but it was my entree to Philadelphia. So one critic wrote about it, thought it was, an insightful, brilliant new thing, and someone else, another critic, called me a bomb that would never explode, a dud. So that was my beginning here in this city, all right? The next painting I'm going to show you is, this is a piece from my early years also. I learned how to make woodcuts when I was a little kid, because in that little town there was this guy, strange, eccentric man who made woodcuts. and he taught me how to make woodcuts. So it just became part of the language of being an artist to me. And so this is an example of that kind of thing I was doing. And then this is a painting from my first show at the Moore Gallery on Walnut Street. The Moore Gallery no longer exists, but it was the gallery, to many people's opinion, the most important gallery for the 1980s and 90s in Philadelphia, and showed some of the most successful artists in Philadelphia for that period of time. I had 20 shows in 20 years there. And I had a real dialogue with the public, a dialogue with the critics, and a dialogue with every artist in town as a result of that presence. It was a wonderful experience. I was given an opportunity because I took it. You know, I told Chuck the first month, I said, look, if you can't do a show every year, you're not really an artist, you're a Sunday painter. And he said, well, we'll see. And he was willing to do it every year. And those were pretty good times. But moving along, during the first years that I started teaching, I got a teaching job in 1983. And one of the things I started to do was draw from the model in my studio and with the students at times. And so frequently the models had different ethnicities than the students in the room, and I just took that as being part of the way things were. So I'd make these big, lush drawings, lots and lots of them, and then I would turn them into paintings like this, which were painted on wooden panels, and I began to carve into them with chisels. And I was creating a new kind of hybrid form of painting, mixed media for sure, but not something that was ever commonly seen. People had probably done this before, but it wasn't commonly seen. So this is a 4 by 8 foot piece. This was in my first show in New York, as was this piece, all of which I sold, and I don't know where any of them are. But they all involve ethnic peoples. So this is based on the fact that there was a discussion about the need for America to go into Central America and get involved in the troubles in Nicaragua and Guatemala. And I was listening in my studio to the radio as I was painting, and I said, we've seen this movie before. This is Vietnam all over again. And frankly, it's Iraq again. It's the same movie we get involved in. But anyway, I said, you know, I'll make this beautiful jungle, and I put these horrible beheaded figures, hanging figures, chopped up figures all through it. Nobody saw the figures in the show in New York. Everybody thought they were beautiful landscapes, and it worked on a certain level, made a nice show, but nobody got the point. So anyway, and here's one more from that group. This one I still do own. And I read something in Time magazine about how they were killing people in Biafra during or Angola, one of these wars. And the quote was, they're just laying the bodies head to toe. So I brought a model in and I did a head to toe drawing, 2 models side by side, and created this big piece, which I still am very fond of. This is 4 by 8, carved into wooden panel. And as you can see, there's some ethnicity in there. All right. Now, another idea I'm extremely thrilled with is the idea of epiphany or transformation. I love the idea of surprise happening and something happening tomorrow that's going to change the direction that my thoughts and my work is going to go. And so this image I made, and I called it the christening, and it was like the idea of something pouring over someone's head. And then I got another idea right after I made that, and I started to pick the wood chips up off the floor and reapply them to the painting and make them an integral part of the picture. And that became a big part of my work. And 27 years ago, I had a show across the hallway in the Morris Gallery here in this building of these paintings that were made using that technique. And here is the image in the Morris Gallery 27 years ago. The big painting on the back wall there is a diptych that closes like the triptych, like the Hieronymus Bosch. And it's a big face on the outside. And anyway, all of those are made out of wood chips and repainted. That one is 8 by 16 feet. The face you see to the left is 8 feet square, and I don't have any of those paintings. And here's one up close so you can see what they look like. And again, I was interested in more than just one type of ethnicity. This is a piece that I did based on the Indians of the Yanomami, who are Amazonian Indians, who are being hunted and like dogs now, as we speak, by oil and lumber companies, and they're shot off the backs of trucks, financed by the World Bank, and nothing seems to change. When I got to South America, after that show that I had in the Morris Gallery, it went to New York, and I sold all the paintings in New York, so I had some money, and I decided to do something interesting, and I had met this woman from Venezuela who said, you know, my country's extremely interesting. I think you would find it very interesting, so I just decided to go there. So my wife and my children, we just went. We didn't know we needed to know how to speak Spanish. We didn't know you needed to know anything other than just be like we were here in Philadelphia. So anyway, during my time there, I did get to go into the Amazon, and I was struck by these painted-faced peoples, and I began to make a series of paintings about them. And all of these paintings I covered with a piece of glass and then smeared black over top of it, so they were a little fuzzed out, so they looked like they might disappear. And I got that idea in a Museum of American Indians in Canada, not from looking at smudged out pictures, but rather seeing artifacts in glass, knowing that they put them in glass boxes. So anyway, at that same time, I went to Colombia, and I got interested in Colombia, is what I saw in Colombia. So I brought my idea of the triptych that opens. So this painting is 8 feet square. That little object in the foreground is pre-Columbian gold piece, and it opens, and when you open the door, you get to see what's inside. And what that was, the first step is putting the viewer into the picture, making you a participant. So if you see the pieces outside, you can walk around it, you participate with the piece, you can touch it, and that's outside the normal for art, right? This painting I made in the anniversary of Gauguin's first trip to Tahiti, and this was symbolic for me because I was going into South America. It wasn't Tahiti, but it was as close as I could come up with, and the idea is these figures are worshiping some unknown tiny child that exists in some shiny hand. Doesn't necessarily make any sense. But I loved making the picture, and it's in the permanent collection at the LaSalle Museum, so you can go up there and see it. They always have it out. It's one of the few things that I have in museums that never is not on the wall. So anyway, I went to South America with my family, and I rented a mountaintop estate that belonged to an artist by the name of Jacobo Borges. And the jungle came right up to the house. The house was a glass pyramid, and it looks great, except it was needing a lot of work, and the insects and the snakes and other creatures could be inside just as easily as outside, so it wasn't all that easy. But anyway, there's my daughter, who now works in West Philadelphia in a battered women's shelter, and there she is enjoying the weather. And this was where I was. This was the landscape. I went there because I wanted an experience. And I also went there and chose this remote place because I wanted to not be able to access the tools and the materials I was used to working in. The wood that I was working in, I had lots of interest in my work, but it was so heavy and so difficult to ship and transport that I wanted to try something else. So my determination was I was going to become the master of paper. So I was making paper there and creating things in paper. This is a show that I had there, which is at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Caracas. So they brought me, I brought all these pieces down to have this lovely show. And this is another piece from there. And so this was another highlight, a very significant event. Gave me credibility, so every artist in Caracas knew who I was suddenly. Yes, the day before, no one knew me. The day the show went up, everybody knew who I was. So, all right. This I made while I was there. This is a mosaic tile piece. It's 37 feet long and 15 feet wide. I've never made a mosaic in my life, but somebody offered me an opportunity to do it, and I always say yes. I never say no. And if I say yes, then I have to figure out how to do it. So It took a month. Me and another guy had to cut 40,000 pieces of tile. We hand cut all of these pieces, and we locked them into little barrels, and then we sat there in the sun and put this thing together. It was strong enough to survive Hugo Chavez's tanks when they rode over top of it. So that was kind of a nice distinction. I got offered an exhibition when after I had been in Venezuela for almost a year. I was offered an exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Maracaibo, which is called Maxul. It's the largest museum of contemporary art in Latin America, and I had a mere 30,000 square feet to fill. So I created paintings out of giant pieces of paper by putting many panels together, and this is how I did that. And then I began hanging some of my paper pieces floating off the walls. I created pieces that you could walk around, and I put pre-Columbian poems on the other sides of these. This is in my studio working on a number of paintings. Then here they are exhibited in the museum space. I made 27 paintings this size. I made 30 smaller ones. In the total year that I was there, it was 175 paintings, which was the best I could do considering what I was up against. So anyway, this is a picture of me in the studio there working on a ceramic piece, and those are the tiles laid out on the floor. And then when I had my show, I reorganized them all and created a boat on the floor. And I brought dirt from outside the museum in, spread it on the floor, and then I made a drawing into the dirt because the museum had this big open space, and I could look down from above and look at the piece down below. This is the final resting place of those tiles. This is in California, outside of Los Angeles. This is a small fragment of the whole piece. I was told the day I would install this piece that it would never look that way again, that the following day it would be covered with graffiti, and for the rest of its life it would be covered with graffiti. I took this photograph 4 years after it was installed. It's never been touched. It's the closest public art piece in the city to the Mexican barrio, and the dreaded Mexicans decided not to paint it, and the reason was, as I said, I think they like it. They like the image, you know. It's like you make an image that people are sympathetic to. Why not, you know? They don't want to live in a filthy place. It's like, you know, they want to have something nice when they look out their window like anybody else, you know? One of the things that I started doing when I was in Venezuela was that's a woodcut plate that I made back there, and then I started making these strange sculptures out of bamboo and covering them with paper and figuring out ways to rigidify the paper. And next, this is a print that I made. This is 16 by 8 feet. It's a woodcut print. And my wife and I pulled this in my studio in 4 by 8 sections, and then we had to assemble it after the fact. And we had no ink. I made this kind of bogus ink, and the paper, I used tracing paper to make the image on, and then transferred it to a more stable support. And but I think it worked out, you know. And the grays were made by putting tracing paper over top of the blackened parts and creating a second tone. Then I would take some of those prints and then paint them to make them into paintings. So I did quite a lot of things with that, playing with it. So you see, printmaking keeps coming back into what I do. Periodically it disappears, then it comes back again. So then those structures I started to make, and I started to put those prints over top of them, paint on it, and use lighting behind them, and create objects that would look a little bit like shields or looked a little bit like seeds. And another thing I did at the time was I began making what I call dream paintings, or sueños, which were, I started with no image, and whatever the only thing I was really interested in was a sense of light and dark. And so this painting is very black and blue, and then a sense of light. But I was really interested in that burst of light in the canvas. This is an installation I did in the Museum of Catholic Art and History in Harlem in New York. And this is my vision of paradise. So I made this huge painted drawing that goes on the wall. Then I covered it with these shaped forms with the lights on top of it. And on the other side of the room was the ocean and the boats that sailed. So this represented the sailing of Europeans from Europe to the New World. If you look closely at this boat, You see this boat is filled with crosses. That's symbolic of like a cocoon carrying religion from Europe. And this boat is filled with people, and I'll show you a detail of that. So I cut out thicker pieces of white paper and glued them on the inside, and then so when the light goes through it, you get a sense. If you've ever held up a cocoon, you can see the little insects inside the cocoon. That's what I was trying to recreate. And so that's where I got that idea. And then I did an installation at the Moore College of Art, just a few blocks from here, of that same work in a different formation. So I was doing a lot of installation work, all of which, the time in Venezuela, my life was completely transformed. It changes at that point. My life, my wife's life, and my children's life all changed. That trip did exactly what I dreamed it could do, which is gave me a new life. And that new life is part of what I'm living now. These are a few more of those pieces that I made with construction and prints over top and paint. And then I did this installation in Miami, which I called the Rainforest. So it's just in a convention center, just like across the street, but you stepped into it and the world disappeared. We blackened the ceiling, we created an ambient sound of dripping water and birds, and so you step through and you walk through the space. And the idea was to kind of replicate the notion of walking through a forest. And here's a picture with people in the room. It was a beautiful exhibition that just cost me a ton of money, and I didn't make any money back, so it was a commercial failure. One of the other things that I did is I worked with mural arts, and I did some murals. This one happens to be in the Andes Mountains in South America. But we have a couple of muralists in the room I recognize as well. And I collaborated on murals here in Philadelphia with school children. I collaborated with other artists. And I went to South America, and I took a white building and transformed it and I collaborated with students. Some I brought with me from the United States, and others I just gathered on the streets and invited people to come and help make the painting. So it's 153 feet long and 18 feet tall. And we did it in 14 days. And we carried every drop of paint with us to the job site and there were days when we had to walk through Molotov cocktail throwing crowds, and when they'd see us, they say, "Oh, the artists are here, stop throwing," and they let us walk across the street, get down to where we were going. So there was some appreciation for what we were doing. And here I am, this is another mural I painted at the same time there in Venezuela, and so there I am painting on it. Another thing I did is a collaborative dance piece. I did the set design and the costumes, and what I did was have somebody come in, and she just modeled every costume, and I painted each one, and we put the next one on, get the next one on, go to the next thing. And so it had 2 performances, but it was fun to do, and it was, again, outside the box. And here's this more of the costumes and the dancers and the performance, and of course you recognize the art in the background. Now, this is another deviation. The Trayvon Martin situation, I'm not black, and I don't know if I can understand all the issues from that perspective, but I lived in Florida, and it was bothering me. So I just printed out this little picture of him from the internet, and I then drew onto those pictures with chalk until I got something I liked. And then I began a wooden head based on this. And if you want to see it, it's down at Brandywine. It's on loan to Brandywine Workshop, and they always have it out. So this is the finished painting. And so what I wanted to do was to create something that gave you some insight into what I was feeling. Part of it was, it's a little animal-like, it's a little scary, but it's also very human at the same time. And the irregular shape represented the hood that he was wearing, which was very controversial at the time. The point was, if you wear a hood, you might as well be shot, because that meant you were probably up to no good, So anyway, that was a variation. And this is one more variation. This is me in my studio working on a drawing. This is a little bit larger than the normal charcoal drawing that you would see being done. This is actually a piece of it. It's 93 feet long by 10 feet high. And why did I make it? I just had to make it for an installation that I was doing, and I loved making it, and that's what I like to do. I love to make the things that I want to see. I made this piece during the election for Barack Obama, and I was impressed with the fact that every time I read an article or saw a television piece, everybody seemed to think Barack Obama was somebody different. And so I started out to make one little black and white painting of Barack Obama, and then I said, maybe I'll make two, because it doesn't look exactly right. Then I make three, and pretty soon I stopped at 50, and I call this the 50 states of Barack Obama. So in one of these images, he looks like FDR. In another image, he looks like an Arab terrorist. In another image, he looks like a savior. He looks like Abe Lincoln. I went through all these different things, and I actually, 12, how many years now? 8 years later, I think it's more true today than it was then, because he still is controversial to so many people who project on him who they want him to be. And then when I exhibited it, I put it together roughly in the shape of an American flag, so it got the sense of 50 states. All right, so that was my point. I'm not a political artist, but periodically I can't escape putting things that are happening in the world around me into my work. And so in the graphic tradition, I made this painting on Mylar. It's black and white, looks reasonable here, but this is where I installed it, on windows, in a stairway, in a hotel in South Beach. And so you walk up and down the stairs, and you're walking through this giant black and white painting. This is a shot in my studio in Miami, and I was working on another set of window paintings. Here they are installed. This was in Beacon, New York, and this gymnasium, this big windows, and then this is what they look like at night. It's rather beautiful. And so I love, the last 10 years, my work is really focused on light, water, air, the elements of life itself. And so I try to stay in that realm. And here's another installation of a similar piece made for the Noise Museum in New Jersey. I think this was last year or the year before, I can't remember now. That led me to making prints that I could put on shaped forms, and that's what you're seeing here. This is 2 by 4 foot, and this is the same print when the light changes. They have changing lights inside, they rotate, and as they change, the image changes. Remember I told you I like transformation and epiphany? Well, these things did it for me. And so some of these have little figures that appear only with certain colors. So you can only see certain parts when it's got the blue light or the red light, And I really, if I knew more about the science of that, I would exploit it better. All right, this is a piece I made for the Philadelphia airport, and it was installed for 6 months in Terminal C. And it's a made-up drawing and lighted sculptural pieces. All right, now. This is how I pay my bills now. This is a wall of paintings in my studio in Miami. I made this for a Norwegian cruise line. And all of these paintings were going to be installed on a ship, on a big wall in a ship. So what you're looking at is they were ultimately installed, I think the space is about 55 feet long. And so they hired me to make these paintings. And that's something that didn't exist in Philadelphia. But cruise lines are big business in Miami, and they've been awfully nice to me. They fund my driving around with my Janus project as well. So anyway, this is the last of these images. This is something I made for Fabergé. I was invited to make something for Fabergé, and I was one of 260 artists, all of whom were much more famous than myself. But I was included in the show called Fabergé Great Egg Hunt in New York. And I made this piece. It was exhibited at Saatchi for 2 months. It appeared in the Sunday New York Times in color, and then this photograph was taken in Central Park at the Yacht Club, where it was exhibited for a month. And I said, there must be something in that egg. People like that shape. So I took that shape, and I used that shape. I'm going to change program here, so just give me 1 second. I used that shape to go to my next creation, which are the inflatables. So I was very fond of the shape, and I just used it again. And I'm going to bring this up just 1 second. Okay, here we go. 2007, I was invited to make an inflatable sculpture. Guy calls me on the phone, says, am I interested? And what I did was I said, yes, I will do it. And again, I told you, I say yes. I never made an inflatable sculpture. I have no idea what that meant. So I was off. So I designed this thing in paper. I made this goofy little thing, and I sent it out, and it was created. And I was nervous, and this was opening night, and it got photographed and appeared on the front page of the Miami Herald the day that Art Basel opened in Miami. So I scooped the town, and I felt pretty good about that. But when I saw this thing go up and I saw some of the other people's work, I had a great insight that I saw an opportunity that I hadn't seen for a long time. So I was committed to making them. I had no idea what I was going to do with them, but I knew there was something there. So what I did was I immediately began to take the one thing that I had made around and put it as many places as I could. This is in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. This is in Caracas, Venezuela. This is in the Andes Mountains, and I went from village to village, and we'd set it up, and the whole village would come, we'd take a photograph, then I'd talk to people for a little while, close it down, and go to the next village and do it again. And I was, and I realized at that moment that what I was doing was taking art into places that would never get to go, and that was pretty exciting. There's no money in this, but there was something else in this, the sense of the adventure. So now, I decided to make a new one, and this piece arrived from the manufacturers. If you think that looks like a giant potato, so do I. And when I opened this thing, this is almost 30 feet long, and I said, what the hell is that? And it didn't look like I thought it was going to look. We had 4 days till the show. So the only thing I could fall back on is my brush, so I said, I'm going to paint it. And I started to paint it. And so for 4 days, I painted. All day, every day. Notice the elaborate scaffolding we're using here. And this was my assistant. This guy is a Cuban filmmaker who wanted to work with me, and he was great. And this is in his backyard in Little Havana, and that was the piece. So I pulled out every trick in the book to make this thing look good, and then it went on display. This is in Palm Beach, the convention center. Then this is another one that I made shortly after that. This one is a 30-foot tall fish, and it has a glass eye at the top. That's clear. So light goes in there, and over here there's a glass window, so if you walk around you can look inside. This is actually on this picture I took in right outside of Toronto in Ontario, Canada. And so you look inside and you see Jonah in the belly of the fish. And it's white on the inside, but black on the outside. And it's because of the light that comes through the eyes at the top, which was completely surprising to me. And the colored dots on the outside are all black dots on the inside. So anyway, I like doing this. So this is an installation of several of my pieces at the Maryland Institute College of Art. I showed these things up in Beacon, New York. I was invited to be in a show of a selected, curated show of 160 years of graduates from Maryland Institute. And when they saw my inflatables, they really responded in a good way, which made me feel good. And then they invited me to come give a talk. And I had 500 students come to that talk, which was nice. And the big message that I had for students is, you can do this. You really can do this. But you can't stick to the script. You have to find a way to live under the wire. You can't live like regular people. You have to live like an artist. Prioritize life as an artist. Every day, that's number one. Everything else is two, no matter what it is. If you're sick, it's two. If you need a phone, you get the cheapest phone you can. You don't get a car. You don't get a studio. You paint where you live. You make it a priority, and you can do this, because it's not likely done without that kind of support, okay? In a summary, that's my message. But anyway, here's my giant covered in snow. And now, this is a Mexican piece. It's actually Olmec, but I love these things. I'm just crazy about them. And they find them all the time in the jungle. No one knows why they're there or how they got there because they're very pre-Columbian. But every one of them is really very magical. And it's not alone that the Olmecs made these heads. The Egyptians made big heads. The Romans made big heads. The Iranians made big heads. They're all over the place, right? So I went to this place. This is called Easter Island. And if there's one place I can tell you that's really worth going, it's this place. My wife and I had a great 2 days there, and I'm telling you, this is a magic place. There are over 800 of these things all over the place. Everywhere you go, you find them in different situations. And I said, you know, there's something in those things. So I took that egg shape that I had gotten from the Fabergé people, and I turned it in. I started with an egg shape. This is the process of the design process in the virtual reality. So I start with a blob that looks a little bit like that potato I showed you earlier. And then I begin to modify it by hand drawing it. Then I scan this into the computer, and it gets translated into a program, and then it gets turned into a virtual image. And then I put two faces together. As soon as I saw that, I said, I got something. It's called a Janus. And I remembered it from my art history class, which was the two-faced god, which now I had to read up on. But I also decided to change it to two colors, because I discovered in recent time that we have a racial problem in the United States. And it's caused by Barack Obama. And it didn't exist before, and if we could only get him out of office, it would go away. And I decided that I had to make a comment about that. So all I said is, people come in different colors, and on my world, they're on equal footing. One guy's facing this way, the other guy's facing the other way, but they're different colors. So that was the first one. And I committed to this idea when I designed it in the computer, and then when I'm telling you this day, when I saw this for the first time, I was jumping like hopping around like a grasshopper, because I had achieved something I could not have ever achieved before. I had realized, determined how to get to where I was trying to go. And so this is one side, and then what you see here, I took that photograph, or one like it, and I made lots of them, printed them out on a household printer, and then I began to draw on them with colored pencils. And the drawings become the working studies for the images. So every one of the giants you've seen, there's 10 pages of scribble drawings trying to get to the right disguise for the face, right? So here's the other side. So these are the two for the big piece that's outside, the first Janus. And it kind of approximates how they're going to look, and it creates a very interesting kind of drawing, one that I haven't quite seen before, and I kind of like it. So anyway, this is Janus in its very early days in my studio, and there's his predecessors. Those eggs are sitting in front of him. Do you notice the similarity in the shape, right? And so I showed this picture to Alan, who happens to be sitting right here, and without even blinking, he said, "Could you bring that to Philadelphia?" Without blinking. He got it in like 13 seconds, you know, fast. And I did. A week, 2 weeks later, I came to Philadelphia, and we set it up on South Broad Street for its first public display. And next, this is taken in Turkey, because I showed that same picture to someone at Norwegian Cruise Line, and they liked it, and they asked me if I could bring it along on a voyage on a ship, because they have a studio, and they put me in there as a visiting as an artist in residence. So I took the piece with me, and I spent 3 months going all over Europe with these things, setting them up. So this is in Seville, in front of the cathedral. In Seville, what I did was I went to every single merchant for 3 blocks and asked them to let me plug it in. Finally, a guy who had a little pizza shop said, "Yeah, why not?" Because you have to plug it in to get electricity, right? So I have a little converter box that converts anybody's electric to power that will work in American current. It's to surprise people, not everyone in the world uses the same current as we do. So anyway, I plugged it in, and I ran a cord. You see the little cord in the foreground here, but I ran a 100-foot cord down the street and around in front of the cathedral entrance. And I stood there for 2.5 hours meeting and greeting people and talking to them about it. And these are some Italian friends I made that day. And these are my police friends I made that day, who introduced me to the idea that permits are necessary when you put pieces in front of the cathedral. And so we talked about it for a little while, and then they said they were not going to leave until I took it down. So I took it down a half an inch at a time. It looked like it was sinking into the ground, but I got to stay another half hour. So, and they stayed the whole time too, so I don't know if it was bad for them or not. This is in London, and as soon as I set this up, people were asking me, could you make a car? Could you make, whatever, I don't know. I said, sure, you can make anything, but this is what I'm making, you know? So then I got to meet Jacques Pepin, the great French chef. He liked it and came by to talk to me. And I have another photograph with him kissing it. And anyway, it was fun to, it's gotten me in some interesting spots. And then I got on a stage and I set it up on a stage and got to see it in a theatrical way. This is in Key West, Florida, in front of the museum in Key West. And then this was taken here in Philadelphia down on 2nd Street in the space. And I put a few of them together to get a photo. And I thought this was kind of gives you a sense of what it's like to stand in the Valley of the Giants, so to speak. This was an audition I did at the Michener Museum, and the Janus Project passed muster, so there was going to be a solo show of the Janus Project at the Michener Museum in 2018, but it looks good in that big space. This was in West Palm Beach at the White Space, which is a small museum there, and here we are out on the green. And here we are at night, that same location shot from a different direction. And this shows you one of its other tricks. They can change color. Now, some of them more effectively than others. As I make them, I learn things. As I learn things, I try to incorporate them. They also have a voicing system which allows them to speak. But I'm not using that here because out on the street there's so much noise you couldn't hear it. And in here in the building, they were afraid it would disturb the museum. So we're not using that. This is right before I went into the Panama Canal, and I took this photograph of a Mayan contemplating my sculpture. And talk about getting out there, this is getting out there. And so I love this image, Then this is two strange images. I was experimenting with painting with the material. And I discovered that the material they're made out of is a really marvelous painting surface. You just have to paint a different way than normal. So you use it like watercolor, and you drive the paint into the fiber. So this is a 3 by 4 foot panel, and this one is 3 by 4 feet. And they're just painted into the fabric, the fabric that the giants are made out of. And now for a little drama. This is Sicily. And here we are in a Roman amphitheater. Sagrada Familia, one of my favorite sites in the world, and Janus gets to visit. And then this is on a cruise ship on top deck. Pisa, of course, the baptistry, can't leave that out. And the Roman Forum in Pompeii. This is 3 different size pieces. This is examples of different size ones. This was taken in an artist studio in Bloomington, Indiana. This is on a 24th floor of a roof in Chicago, downtown Chicago. And that man with the gray shirt is one of 3 structural engineers who were there to supervise the installation to make sure it didn't blow off the roof and kill somebody. All right, so this was just taken 8 days ago in Chicago. The city of Chicago brought the Janus Project. This is the largest presentation ever done. We had 9 on display. 2 on rooftops. This is by a grand ballroom in the Hyatt Centric Hotel. This is on the street, on Monroe Street in downtown Chicago. This is on downtown Chicago on the street. Here's another one on the street. And here's another one at night lit up on the street. And here, this one I took in an alley in Ontario in Toronto, Canada. And that little boy is the son of Ross Bonfante, who's a wonderful Canadian artist. I took this photograph last night here on Broad Street with Janus lit up and City Hall in the background. And this is what they look like in the night when it's light, when they're lit up from inside. And this is the last image, which I think should be it should be a movie, yes. So you'll see them change in color. And with that, I'm going to explain the point of the Janus Project. The Janus Project are mobile monuments to equality, gender neutrality, justice, and honesty. They won't wear a mask. Everybody's wearing a mask. Nobody is without one. And when you put Janus outside a door, you put it on a street, it's like being at a dinner party and someone just says a terribly inappropriate thing. Or you see somebody on the street who doesn't fit in, who's horribly disfigured or been a victim of amputations or something, and how do you deal with that? And what Janus does is stimulates a conversation among people in a pleasant way. I'm not beating anybody over the head. Janus makes you smile. It also is a little spooky, but it makes you smile, and you do want to touch it, and you do want to punch it, and you do want to play with it a little bit, and at the same time, it does carry its message. And it's my way of getting something out there that might make a difference. But it's also my way of getting art out of the box, out of the studio, out of the museum, into the world where people live, where people can react to it and interact with it. And so I think I've explained the point of the Janus Project, and I encourage you to take a photograph and post it, put the hash mark, mention the Janus Project, share it with a friend, and the project isn't over. There's a few places left. I haven't been in there's 2 continents I haven't gotten to yet, Australia and Antarctica, but there's a lot of other places on all the other continents where we might get to go. So I thank you so much for all of your attention. I hope that it was worth your effort, and it's been a great pleasure to do this. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Now, this is the package they travel in. Now I'm going to show you one setting up. It's a zipper, goes like this. Thank you for reminding me. And you undo its belt, and you turn on its buttons, and it will rise. Everything is self-contained. In the earlier inflatables, there was a lot of packaging, a lot of machinery, and a lot of staking and things that went on. But this will do itself justice in just a moment here. And there it is. And it will change color for you, okay? So thank you.